Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate.
Hi, Annie, with your beautiful hair.
Thanks. Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So we are celebrating your high performance on special education advocacy with Ashley Barlow. You, friend, are one of our favorite guests. Congratulations.
Thanks. Whenever we can talk about behavior, I think people get interested.
Behavior is quite popular. And that's, of course, we're going to continue to talk about behavior today. But I also think that you have such a unique and helpful way to make things that are extremely complicated sound very accessible to parents and also very meaningful to professionals that are working with kids, whether it's other behavior, technicians or BCBAs or teachers, administrators, etc. So, if you all do not already follow Annie online, I definitely recommend. Let's start there. Why don't you give everybody just a little background on what you do, who you are, and where they can find you online?
Sure. Yeah. So I am Dr. Annie McLaughlin, sometimes use Dr. Annie, but really, I don't usually use Dr. Annie because I think it puts some like differential in discussion and hierarchical. So oftentimes I am trying to be super collaborative, but my background is in special education. I was a special ed teacher. And then I went back to school to get my doctorate in special education. And during that time, I also got certified as a behavior analyst. So I have done behavior analysis in schools, I've done it in clinics and homes, as well as then kind of moving into this next realm that I have supported and run an IEP advocacy business in Maryland, where we mostly support families navigating the special ed system. And we work with school districts, which I actually love, that we help families and we help school districts mostly around the implementation of teaching strategies, behavior supports, trainings, teachers, all of that, like in schools to help. And then one of my latest passions that started right around COVID, when you had a lot of time to kind of figure out what was going to be next, is helping behavior analysts and other related service providers, which has been fun. So we've had speech pathologists and psychologists, school psychologists, add IEP advocacy to their business or kind of their scope so that they really understand special education and how to advocate. So I have a whole Instagram kind of handle around that. And that's IEP Advocate Annie, where I focus on talking about IEP advocacy. What is it, from a behavior analytic lens, just how can behavior analysts incorporate that into what they do, as well as the business side of things. So I think people come to me to think is like, can I do this? Like, is this a job? Like, I didn't know I could help families. I already help them, but how can I kind of bridge kind of my desire to help families with also, being able to support my family with income as well?
Yeah, and it's good. It's really good. So if you don't follow IEP Advocate Annie online, hop over there. Annie's always got great ideas that inspire us, inform us, give us real practical strategies. I'm a big fan. I think I'm a mega fan of IEP Advocate Annie. So we're always so grateful to have you back. And I think, Annie, another kind of like superpower that you have is you've got the information about why advocacy works because you have been in so many places and you continue to be in so many places. You continue to be inside schools, helping teams, working from the parent side, working as the expert, like the disinterested expert side, working as an advocate. I wonder if you have any insight into why it helps for parents to be involved, why parents have to advocate, and to that extent, why other people in the school team have to advocate in the IEP setting.
So I think it's so fascinating. So many parents who call that initial conversation is either one of two things, something like a crisis, right? Like something has happened to their child that they're really upset about, or they call and they're like, I just don't know if what I'm asking for is reasonable. And so many parents are worried about, I think, like, ruffling the feathers of the teachers and the school. And is it reasonable that I ask for this? Is it okay? And so, what I really try to do is help families identify what their values are, what are their priorities, and to realize that, like, that might change over time, right? So, like, if you're calling me as an entering kindergarten family, that is very different than a third or fourth grade family, very different than a 16-year-old family. But I want to hear from them, like, what is important to you, and what um how can we get this information to the school? So when once that's identified, I think then with families saying, okay, what do we need to help bridge that home and school? I don't want to even say gap, but just communication, right? Like what do we need to bring to them and have a plan? And that really helps families know, okay, my main plan, I was just talking with the family, and the family really wanted to focus on communication. This child has a complex communication system that is high tech, and everybody needs to be trained on it, but it feels like not everybody is trained, right? So she called me. We've been working for a long time, and it was just like, is it reasonable to think that, the aide at lunch is going to be trained? Or is it reasonable to think that the PE teacher is going to be trained? And, it's kind of, yes, of course, right? This is a kid's primary mode of communication. But that doubt, right? That doubt that comes up, I think is something that I help family, identify their values, prioritize what they want to talk about, and then amplify their voice to get an answer and then follow up. So I think that parents, I think so many parents that call me, and I am a parent of 3 kids as well, you're kind of always weighing, like, what is too much? I don't know if that was maybe where we are as parents when we grew up, or like how much is too loud, and how can I make sure that my kids getting what they out, um, you know, being too pushy, is usually what I hear from parents. But the more parents are involved and able to ask for what they need or want for their child, I think it brings a sense of like calm and peace to them. Um, to know that, okay, yes, the PE teacher is going to be able to understand my child when they're using their communication system and how that benefits the child in the long run. Um, And then, the other piece that I think is really fascinating is I get a lot of calls from behavior analysts who are at the IEP table, typically somehow associated with the school system. And they always are like, I don't know what I can say. Right. And I'm like, whatever you need. Say what, say, yeah, say what you need to. Right. But I think the idea of like not wanting to mess up or not wanting to rock the boat too much also from their point of view. And so when I think of like teams, right, like if we could all just show up, bring what we bring to the table and realize that that collaboration and discussion is what the team is about. And so I kind of look at the advocacy piece from making sure you know your lens and to value everybody else's lens at the table.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't have said that better myself. And I think you had so many different components in there. Um, but really it comes back to those interests and values and what the family wants for the child, what the family is doing outside. And then, kind of the fact that we can't do it alone. Like we're supposed to do it as a team. And the reason we're supposed to do it as a team is because research says that works. It should be that easy. So let's talk about behavior. Do you have kind of like, I don't know, like a top 10 checklist or probably better top 3 checklist? Like when are schools, what are the trends that schools and parents are saying, gosh, we're having a really hard time with this? When are you getting called in most often? Um, and then we can talk about what we do to support those things.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of funny. A side note is people call us when everybody else has been like, oh, well, we can't do that. So we get called in for very complex cases, whether it's, a child who won't leave their house, right? And it's like the school can't go, the insurance can't go, like all these cases. So we get very unique cases, but I'm going to kind of leave that in its separate bucket and kind of talk about the schools component. I love the other bucket because it's always like a puzzle when we have to work with a lot of people and a lot of collaboration. What we're seeing mostly in the schools, and we're just starting the school year now, right? So I'm kind of interested to see what 2024, 2025, as we're recording this, it's the end of August. So what that brings. But I would say kind of what we saw at the end of last year was, I think we're kind of getting to the sense of there's a lot of new people in education. We're seeing a lot of new teachers, whether they are, first time out of college or they are second career, third career, right? Like kind of entering later. And, kind of really understanding what it means for every child to learn and be supported behaviorally in classroom without overwhelming, right? It's hard. This is hard work. And I think some of the needs of our kids have changed. I think the data is supporting some of that impact that happened during kind of the COVID closures and changes and stress on the family has impacted our little ones, or everybody.
That's it. And everybody else. Yeah.
Including teachers, right? I mean,
Right.
teachers and staff worked through that just like those families did and the kids and all that. So I think like what I really am seeing is the need to be creative and humble in the classroom of not having the answer for every kid. I mean, I had a great discussion with a teacher last night. She had been teaching, it was a back to school night for my kids, actually. And she had been teaching for, I think, 16 or 17 years. I forget which number she said. And she said, we're already off to a full start this year. And, I'm feeling like I'm going to have to pull in some other people to get new ideas.
Yeah. Creative.
Yeah. Creative.
But, I'm so happy that you talked about humble. I like to talk about vulnerability a whole lot because I love this book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team. IEP teams are teams. And
I have to tell you, before I bought that book because you've mentioned it. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my shelf. I'll put it over in October to do.
You're gonna love it. Well, just like whatever else we talked about. Updating your CV. That's what it. Folks, we talk about real fun things before we hit record. Just like that, 5 dysfunctions of a team might roll into February. But what he talks about in that book, the author is Patrick Lencioni. If y'all want to look it up, I should just start adding it as a hashtag or as a footnote to every show note. Is that we have to start with vulnerability in order to basically prevent ego from entering discussions. And what we don't want is we don't want ego. And so many of us in IEP land have entered places where teachers are kind of like, well, this wasn't my decision. It was yours. I knew Orton Gillingham wasn't going to work. I knew that this kid needed to be in the seclusion room or safe room, or sometimes, heaven forbid, they even sometimes call them sensory rooms or whatever it is. I knew the kid needed to be secluded all day long, every single day, because I can't handle that, whatever it is. And what really needs to happen is we need to have vulnerable discussions about why that sentiment is happening, so that then we can address the heart and soul of it based on interests and values of everybody at the table. Right. And then we get buy-in, and then we all want to try to help. And that maybe that happens in 5 or 10% of teams, but then those are the big voices that go in and influence other discussions, unfortunately. So what do we do? If a child is struggling behaviorally at school, what are kind of your first steps? So I'm thinking about my main audience out there is parents, and parents are getting phone calls left and right, especially since the pandemic. The data is pretty clear, saying, we're just really struggling. Behaviors that we maybe used to have are more significant. Behaviors that we didn't have at all are either trickling in, or we've got some big doozy behaviors. So where do you recommend teams start?
Believing that the child is trying to tell you something.
Ah,
So, yeah. So it almost
listen, this is why you want to listen to Dr. Annie. She's about to
Yeah.
say something really brilliant. Because
And
you know what she didn't say? Data.
Mhm.
Yes, of course, people, we start with data. Okay. But Annie's about to say something really brilliant. We're going to start with mindset. Okay.
Mhm.
Believing that the child is trying to say something.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
And no, it always chokes me up because the teams that we work with the most that are successful, that even if we're not in a good spot, is assuming positive intention from the child, even though they may not be, uh, behaving in a way that might be appropriate. Like if we just put it in layman's terms, right? So assuming that there is, it's not a child deficit, that there is something in the environment. It may even be something internal with the child, but that it's not from a deficit component. So that, or a deficit viewpoint, that we're kind of all here together to figure out what does this child need. And that really came from, years of trying very analytic approaches, right? Of saying, where's the data? Like, well, let's come to the table and look at all the data. Yes, absolutely. Let's look at all the data, and we need the data. But you can also get a lot of data by asking the teacher and parent, what do we think the child's trying to tell us? Right. And it's like, this is too hard. I don't understand. I'm hot. It's too loud. Um, we did this already. Don't make me do this again. Like, what is the child trying to say so that we can then focus our efforts on teaching a new skill if the child does need a new skill, teaching the adults how to acknowledge that child and their needs. The number, and this is a little bit of a side note, but the number one thing when families are calling me right now, and even teachers, is if you say it out loud, or at least you say it to yourself, is I believe you, right? Like I believe the child when they're saying something. So I'll give a home example. I have a son who was yelling, just yelling, and he was like, my sisters are bothering me. Like this is, whatever. And my first response was, they're not loud. They're just in the other room. Like, but what I know I need to say to my son is, I believe you. I believe they are too loud for you right now. Right. But that for you. Yeah. And so, but that takes him from looking at me going, okay, like, so what do you need to do right now? Right. That like, do you need to go upstairs? Do we need to go outside? Do we need to put on music? Like, what do we need to do? But I believe you. And so when I think of teachers, believe me, I wanted him to stop yelling. He was making it louder. It was too loud for me. Right. But like, if you can come to that mindset of, a kid pushes the work off and, work off the table, and your response is to yourself as, I believe that you don't want to do this, right? Like we got to figure out what is it about this work or the environment or some internal needs that I believe you that you don't want to do this work.
So what about, I mean, like I've never heard anything more brilliant, but I'm putting on the pants of not the pants. That's a weird thing to put on. I'm not putting on their pants. I'm putting on the hats.
Okay. Yeah.
My listeners who are tired and fed up and wake up at 3 a.m. because A, they're middle-aged women, and B, they have kids with disabilities and they're real tired.
Yeah.
And I showed Annie, you guys, the pile of jackets I've taken off because I keep getting so hot. And they're like, okay, I've tried that. I've said like behaviors, communication, behaviors, communication, behaviors, communication. So the first thing I'm going to say is Annie said something super brilliant. Instead of saying behaviors, communication, why don't you ask this question and then shut the, what do we think he's trying to say when he's shouting, when he's behavioring. Period. Sit there quietly for 2 minutes. Seriously, sit there and let people answer that. I think, Annie, that's brilliant. And if that's one thing people take away today, I think that's super helpful. But you've been in meetings, I've been in meetings, and our people think, they've only done this for one child or for 2 children. And it's people that they love immensely. So it's extremely emotional when you're with the lady, the teacher, who has been teaching for 34 years, and she's ready to retire. And she knows everything, even though the word behavior was never taught in college for her 34 years ago. And she's like, yeah, I don't really think he's trying to tell me anything. I just think he's like checked out. I don't think he's paying attention. I am just going to send him down to the principal.
Yeah.
What about that like negative Nancy that's saying that on their face?
Yeah. Well, this is 2 different things. Are they saying it or are they saying it on their face? Because if they're just saying it on their face, then I usually say, I see that maybe that doesn't align with what you're thinking should happen, right? Like we have to bring doubts to discussion, right? Because, what I'd say is that she has a lot of value for that 34 years that she's been teaching. So, what is it about what she's learned that maybe he doesn't want to do it, right? So like, okay, he doesn't want to do it. Is, really having a discussion of, saying to the teacher, guess what? I believe you. I believe you that you think he doesn't want to do it. And he probably doesn't, right? But like, so what in that discussion of, the other phrase that I like to use, just like ever so, I change it, but it comes from like my notes in my brain is, how's that working for you? Right. So, but you don't want to say that directly to a teacher who's been teaching for 34 years, right? But
Right.
it is the idea that I soften that depending on what it needed. But like, okay, so he's going down to the principal's office, but that's not getting any better, right? Like he's still going down. This is still a thing for him. So, do we think we can try something different? Do we think that, there might be something that we can change here? And, usually the answer is yes, the kid needs to do the work, right? And the hard response is to say, we have to really provide reinforcement over time to get him to do the work. And that starts with changing adult behavior. And that's really, really hard to say to people who just want the kid to comply. But what we know is that we all want, like most of us want to comply as much as we can for the ideas and the beliefs and the body and the sensory and the regulation that we all have at the moment. And to assume that good intent from everybody at the table. So really kind of saying, how's that working? Like it's not working, right? We have to try something different. And that's hard because it feels confrontational.
Well, I think you raised something else in there too. I mean, I think that is so brilliant and wise, and you do it a lot more gently than I do because I immediately jump into like why kids so deserving, and you've got this foundation of what kids so deserving built into there, and like I hit him over the head with it, and I'm going to try that approach because I know it's more effective. Because sometimes when I go into this kid's so great, this kid's so deserving, look what the psychologist said about him. If it's not like an emergency, like a manifestation review or something, oftentimes like they just kind of meet you with, no, he's not. And you're like, well, then we're going to agree to disagree, but you still have to educate him. So good luck, and so I really, really like your approach. But what you also built in there is that there is this desire to have a better outcome. And I guess like the next natural question is then how do you kind of wrap in the component of the data drives the instruction, and therefore we need to have data on these things because it's very rare that we have data on how often kids go to the sensory room or how often kids go to the principal or take a walk around hall with the aid. But what parents say to you and me quite often is, you know, they aren't allowed to even use the AirPod. They aren't allowed to take the break, or they spend all of their time in the hallway. Um, and I think that that's a problem too, right?
Yeah. And you're right. I hear usually both ends, right? Of the all day taking laps around, the school, or, not allowed to leave, or leave only in a designated time. And, what I think really it comes down to, and this is where like I put on a little bit of that behavior analytic hat, is understanding what the purpose of all of those pieces are, and understanding the values that the teacher brings to the table there. Because what I tend to hear is like, well, I don't want to let him take a break whenever, because I don't want him to miss instruction. And what I hear there is you have high expectations for this student, right? Like I get right, like, wow, absolutely. I hear that you want him to learn, and you believe that your instruction is a way for him to learn. I understand that, right? Like, let's think about then how he can get that information when he's out for a break, because he can't wait. Right. So like kind of acknowledging and validating kind of what their concern is, and then filling in that piece that they're concerned about. And then I know you were talking about data, like how do we get that data? Oftentimes, this is where I love the course that I teach, because it's a behavior analyst. So it's like use all the knowledge that you have. And this is hard for parents because they don't have this background knowledge, to pick the easiest and um, m- minimal data collection that you need to make a better decision, or to make a decision about the situation. Um, so is it how often he's in the hallway? Is it how long he's in the hallway? Is it, did he ask or did he not? And so when you get a data sheet that you feel like you need 10 different pieces of information, that's people actually don't then end up knowing how to analyze it. So, like, what data do you really need? And I think agreeing on that in the meeting, and being able to have the conversation of, oh, well, look, he only went 3 times, like, but I still feel like, from what he says or whatever, he's in the hallway a lot. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, every time he goes, it's a 45-minute walk. Let's switch data collection, right? Then like a start time and an end time. So rather than always feeling like you need all of the data to make the decision, narrowing it down for, who should be collecting it. And this is a where is the data kept is huge. So if a kid is leaving the classroom, maybe the data is where the kid is going, right? If there's a break room that they want to go to, put the data sheet there, because maybe an adult will go with them. If it's to access the fidget box that's in the desk, right? Then put the data sheet on the lid of the fidget box so somebody can just mark it. If a general education teacher is keeping track of how many times a kid might raise their hand to participate or shout out, right? We can take data on anything. Give them a sticky note from where they normally stand, rather than feeling like this data sheet has to be, you know, on a clipboard in a spot. Like, looking at how easily that data can fit into what people are already doing is a great discussion to have, because you need the data. You don't need to make everything harder. It might be harder, but you don't. There's oftentimes a little bit of an easier way to do it without making it too burdensome.
Yeah, because you're doing it for 15 kids in your high school classroom, or whatever. I mean, it's just so brilliant, because your approach has such an affirming, collaborative spirit with so much objectivity behind it. And I always say, like, the real magic in special education is when you can marry your subjective feelings as a parent or an advocate with the objective data to really benefit a kid. And this is so organically perfect in your approach. So I really commend you, and this is why I like for my people to hear the way that you explain this. Um, so for anybody on teams out there that feel like, I just want to take my advocacy to the next level. Um, what, like, can you offer just a couple of tips that you think are super helpful when a kid is experiencing behaviors in school? Like, are there, um, is there one thing that you're like, you've got to always remember this, or you've got to do this?
I think you probably have to talk to people, right? You have to not do emails. You have to not write in the communication journal back and forth. You need to have a discussion with somebody because you will get the information much more organically and hear and be able to ask the question. So I find that so much of our communication is quick and text and between this and that. But really, that discussion and validation and, kind of hearing is somebody looking away or rolling their eyes or, all of those things to really be able to say, like, okay, can you tell me more? Like, it hurts when he hits you, right? Like, I mean, validate that, but you're not going to put that in a text, like, oh, he hit me today, right? And I know a lot of parents are always like, I never know what to say. Like, I'm sorry. But if you have that discussion, like, oh, I'm really sorry. I hope that, are you okay? Didn't hurt. Can you tell me more? And to get more information from people. So I think whether it's in person or, I think kind of hierarchically, like in person is best, right? But if you can do a Zoom to see people's faces and then a phone call, but to get communication happening, with the people who are involved in that child or individual's life.
I love that because it's relate. I think like I use humor to relate a lot. But whatever your skill set is, relate, I mean, I'm always like, I, I remember, Annie, to that point, I'll tell a little story. I remember in a really difficult meeting for my own child, um, that I had this like epiphany. It was like the heavens opened and somebody was like, hang on a second. And I said, listen, I realized we were trying to put Jack in we were trying to place him in his home school for kindergarten. And the school was of the opinion that they didn't have the resources to do that. And I I said, hey, listen, I didn't think I had the resources to do it either. And I had a baby at the hospital that needed some place to go. And I made the a choice that was really obvious to me. Okay, he's coming to my house. Um, and guess what? I've been at this for 5 years now, and there hasn't been anything that I haven't been able to figure out. I know you all can figure this out. I'm trying to figure it out too, and I will figure it out with you. The joy is we get to keep learning, we get to keep creating new things and collaborating with new people. And it really is a joy if you shift the framework. But I'm telling you, it doesn't need anything that this school doesn't have right now. And like, relating to them and saying, "Oh, it's hard and it's intimidating, but you've got it." I mean, there were a lot of people that were like, you can see in their facial expressions that that was new, that that was a new way of thinking, and it was that framework shift. So, yeah, yeah,
I
okay,
think that intentionality of relating, right? Of I know that came to you, but I think the reason that, I've had a other full-time people and I've been doing this for 13 years is like I have to sometimes really look for a way to relate to some people who are difficult, right? Like I mean, we work with some difficult people sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's professionals, sometimes it's, my neighbors or, people I run into at Target. But like I think we have to like that humanity, be humble and like really try to relate even in the difficult times. Because I do think that then hopefully brings up some collaboration to all benefit the family and the child.
yeah, yeah, it's so great. We have just a couple more minutes, and I want to shift gears a little bit. I think we put a really nice bow on that discussion. So, quick little gear shift because I would love to talk about a trend that I see a lot, and it is when behaviors, capital B behaviors, and lowercase b behaviors, all of them, get in the way of kids being able to access general education. I think it happens for a lot of reasons. I think it happens because schools don't have the resources, they don't have the knowledge, they think their teachers aren't trained. I honestly think that schools are afraid of something that really is quite unreasonable happening. Like, there's no way that's going to happen, but they're protecting the whole environment from XYZ happening. Um, but, do you have an advocacy strategy? I guess, first of all, is that something that you see? And second of all, do you have kind of like a pathway to help parents and teams navigate that when gen ed teachers are like, I can't do this, and so I think they need to go to a different educational placement?
Yeah, definitely. I think are seeing an increase in that challenge in schools. And I think I come from this from two different perspectives or two different avenue for strategies. One is what are the expectations for the teacher for this child during X period of time? And I kind of said this earlier. I do think it often comes from the expectation that I need to be teaching everybody. I need them all to learn. I'm doing X lesson with X objective, and everybody's doing this worksheet or everybody's doing this activity. And really, and I'm not putting this on the teachers because, like, the system at times into the story, the system at times is not as supportive. They need more time to differentiate. They need more time to understand how can this kid access this objective with still having high expectations and standards. So I think oftentimes pulling in administration to be able to say, like, it's okay to differentiate this objective to this level or this. And I see this across the board for differentiation, both for extension activities for kids who are academically or intellectually gifted, as well as kids who might need an easier objective. And I think sometimes it's really a misunderstanding of, like, I'm not allowed to do that. And it's like, let's talk about, like, what is that we're talking about, right? And can they do that? And can they have an alternative activity? So, like, I think it comes from, like, a good place of teachers wanting to make sure that kids can learn all of this and that everybody's supposed to learn these objectives.
Yeah.
So I think having a discussion with admin, and not in a tattletale way, of more just like, help us understand what is your understanding and guidance for differentiation of instruction across multiple um different levels, because we have lots of kids in the class and you have different levels, period. Every objective, you will have different levels.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other thing, so that's one, is more around the instructional piece. And actually, I love that. I love different instruction and figuring that out. That's my, like, old teacher hat. And then
Yeah.
the other piece that I find is really attending, and this is a little bit more behavior analytic. What do we want the child to be doing? Right. And so how can we teach that then? Right. Rather than, like, yes, we have expectations. We want the child to independently transition to the next center. That's what we want them to do. But then we need to identify that as a learning priority or learning target, and not continue to get upset that they won't transition. Right. Like, we have to then look at it as an area that needs support, whether it's more reinforcement, more individual, like a person to support, a peer to support, visual, like, how can we help that skill grow rather than just being like, he won't transition.
Yeah.
I would say flip it. He won't
Skill
transition.
deficit. Like,
Yeah. What
teach it
can
as
we
a
do?
skill deficit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. The two different, like, instruction and then kind of those supports that we can put in place. And that's all kind of before we would need to get into this bigger kind of SBA.
Right. Like, what's the function of this? Like,
Yeah.
what are you using at home to help, or what's you use at OT to help, or like, yeah, I mean, what incentive or building the skills, all of it, any of that could help. Ooh, I couldn't agree with you anymore. But I love the way you summarize that so incredibly succinctly. Erie, you're just incredible.
Thanks.
You've got something super cool coming up. Why don't you tell everybody about what's getting ready to launch?
Yeah. So I am running the seventh, which is kind of funny. It feels like it's a big number. The seventh part of my course, Pivot into IEP Advocacy, which actually just got its registered trademark, which I was really excited about. I know. Isn't that exciting? So now I get to put the little arm with the circle around it. Um, and so that's a course. It's a 12-week course for behavior analysts or other related service providers who want to add that IEP advocacy to what they're doing. And we do both kind of the course online and meet twice a month to kind of talk through all of the pieces of the course or where people might get stuck. Um, and I'm limiting spots this time. Last time we kind of maxed it out, and I want to make sure everybody gets enough feedback and one-on-one time. And right now it's still just me. So I'm really excited that should be open September 10th through 24th, 2024, pending any changes, but that hopefully will be when people can enroll. And, I know sometimes people are like, oh, I can't do it now, or how much time is it? All of that is on the website at iepadvocacytraining.com if they wanted to go there, or follow me on Instagram at IEP Advocate Annie for kind of all things pivot into IEP advocacy related.
Love it. Annie, you are such a gift to our community. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Ashley.